Hello everyone and welcome back to House, the Shared Living podcast. We're delighted to be back once more with all the news, views and insights from the shared living sectors. And this week we've got a very special guest host. Brendan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Brendan Geraghty. I'm the Chief Exec of the Association for Rental Living. We develop, promote and generally advocate for all things built to rent, and we set the standards for the sector.
That's great, and thank you Brendan for being here. It's really great to have you. You're still stuck with me, Deenie Lee from the Property Marketing Strategists.
And Sarah Canning from the Property Marketing Strategists.
And we do have apologies from Dan today, but he is away enjoying time with his newborn baby. We're exactly where he should be, but you're in very good hands with the three of us today. Before we go on with the episode, we'll just have a quick word from our headline sponsor.
Season 5 of Housed, sponsored by mystudenttools.com. List your properties commission-free and reach thousands of students searching for their university home.
Dan and the team from My Student Halls have been supporters of House since the beginning, and we are incredibly grateful that they're here once again as headline sponsors of Season 5. We know anyone working in student accommodation is busy budget setting at the moment, so make sure you get in contact with Dan and the team to make sure you have My Student Halls in your budget for the 26-27 leasing season. And of course, a huge thank you to Wash Station and Utopia for coming back and sponsoring Housed once again. We will hear more from them later. So last week, Sarah and I were out and about in London, and we went to the BizNow Student Accommodation Summit. Sarah, do you want to tell us a little bit more about what we learnt there?
Yeah, thank you BizNow for inviting us to attend. It was very, very well attended. It was an afternoon event, which is great. Just, a couple of short, sharp hours in the afternoon and with plenty of networking opportunities. And actually, we thought that the panelists were very open and honest about the challenges of the sector, which was very refreshing. Lacking a little bit in solutions, but I'm sure we'll come on to that. But certainly there was an awareness and honesty about what the problems are. One of them was talking about the data needing on commuting students. And it feels like in the PBSA sector, everybody is feeling a lack of occupancy, and that could be down to commuting students. Obviously, as we discussed last week, there are lots of reasons why people don't live in PBSA. But while we've got Brendan here, we thought, why don't we pick his brains, being the BTR expert that he is. So Brendan, why do you think students might like living in BTR?
Well, to some extent, I think built to rent is a bit of an evolution of PBSA, and certainly the rooms are bigger, so there are some advantages. But in all honesty, I think that built to rent has been picking up students really from the get-go, with on average, about 20% of the occupants of buildings are students. I mean, some are as high as 30%. So we see them as a very welcome cohort within the building. If we're honest with ourselves, they're a little bit of a safety net to full occupation for our sector, and how long that will last is perhaps a question that we should give some thought to sometime very soon. But in reality, I think it's about consistency and predictability and quality of accommodation. That's not to say that those don't exist in PBSA land, but in built-to-rent land, it obviously is at a slightly different market position with slightly different levels of support and amenity and all that kind of thing. So it does tend to attract the wealthier student, I suppose, but it does also attract a number of sharers, and I'm aware of a number of shared apartments in built-to-rent that are occupied by groups of students. So it's there, it's part of the solution, and we welcome students in like we will anybody else.
Is it welcomed in by accident, or is there a targeted approach to getting those students? And one of the things that we hear a lot is about that there's certain quotas, and BTR won't go over those quotas. What would you say is the reality of that?
There is a little bit of that going on. So there is a concern that the student culture and long-term lets, people who are in there for a longer term lease, don't mix, or shouldn't. It may not mix well. I find that slightly odd, but some people will take that view. Equally, if we look at short-term lets, there are those who think that would contaminate the culture of community that is trying to be created in built-to-rent land. But if we walk down the average street, I'm sure we won't walk very far before we find one house who's got Airbnb and another house that's a shared dwelling of any description, as well as those who are permanent residents, and they all seem to get along famously, or at least in theory they do. So do people set limits on it? I think they do. I think that's a little bit of a suck it and see approach. those who have had students in there for longer times, and very often they're more mature students, they're the master's guys and above, report no problems at all. But there may be the odd one, I'm sure. But generally speaking, they don't report problems, but they do seek to limit it on the grounds of a sort of a community issue. But those are individual business decisions. As an organization, as the ARL, we promote diversity of all sorts, and we provide, and particularly cultural diversity. We need to accommodate the entire world in our buildings, and that's certainly what I hope we will do.
So we have our own ideas on this, but I'd be really interested to get your thoughts, Brendan. What do you think it is about the product? Because I think what we feel like is students aren't going to BTR because there's nowhere else available for them. There's plenty of beds available, and actually there's voids in PBSA. So there's something about BTR in some instances, in some cities, that is appealing about the product that is not appealing about the product of PBSA. What are your members, your network, what are they saying about it?
Look, we've got to compare apples with apples, and I don't think it's fair for me to say, oh, well, PBSA does this and we do that, and that's why we're better. I think it's a very different product. There are differences, of course. There's differences in the size of units. There's differences in the amenities which are available. And there's differences in, I think, just the nature of occupation being slightly different, and also a much greater diversity of people. So when you're in student halls or you're in PBSA land, you're with students, whether you like it or not. Whereas in Build to Rent, we have a much, much more varied demographic and of age groups, cultures, and so on and so forth. So I think it's very much really a question of horses for courses, and affordability on top of that. And I suppose Build to Rent is a little bit more like a permanent home rather than PBSA, which is long-term but temporary accommodation. I mean, it's for the academic years. I know that can be extended, but in principle, it's not a permanent home. It is a temporary home, whereas Build to Rent could be permanent if you wanted it to be, and it has the characteristics of a permanent place to live. And that permanency, that homeliness, for want of a better word, is important. And I think community is important, to be able to find a community that reflects your own values. And when you're a student, not always are those values all accommodated. And that's largely, I think, to do with the demographic. But in Build to Rent, I think we have a more diverse community naturally, and so therefore there's a little bit more to choose from.
Thanks, Brendan. That was perfectly put, and I think gives a lot of food for thought about the design of these spaces and the management and the flexibility. Just shifting to another topic that was discussed at the BizNow conference, they were talking about challenging the underwrite. There's a big gap that goes, between doing, the investment appraisal and the completion of the building. Several years have passed in that process, and what's in the underwrite isn't necessarily reality. Would student numbers typically be factored into BTR, in that, safe 20% really in some of those major university cities?
I think they are now. I don't think they always were. I think our valuers are lovely people, but they move slowly and they eventually get there, which is important. But, they don't recognize short stay either, which I think is silly. This diversity of people within the building and the diversity of tenure within the building is part of the diversity of life, and it's part of the diversity of everything. And every community has a range of people who stay for different times and all the rest of that kind of thing. So I think, we can take curatorship a bit too far. We can control diversity to some extent, and what I mean by that is not controlling as in to eliminate certain people, but to have it proportional within the mix that we're trying to do, and that may be business models which require that. But I think what's important is that we don't come at this from a position of exclusion, and find ways to accommodate all needs. Now, I'm going to move this into a slightly bigger point, which is a point about what does rental really do? And what rental really does is spots a gap and fills it in a way that the sales market is incapable of doing. So my current view on this is that the rental world is the incubator, the creative laboratory of housing. All the innovation in housing comes from rental. Landlords or whoever spot a need in the market, and they respond to that need, whether it be student halls, co-living, built to rent, later living, single family, it doesn't really matter. There's a need in the market and we respond to it. Whereas the sales world have given the same old product without much evolution for quite a long time now. I think they may need to go and sort of evolve their product a little bit. So the rental market is not understood in terms of the value that it brings to society as a broad laboratory of experimentation and innovation. And that's really, really important in the world that we're going into. But part of that is the accommodation of people of all sorts, but also living models of all sorts. So if affordability is the issue, that's why co-living was invented. But do we get support for co-living? We'll discuss that another time. Built to rent. Why was built to rent invented? Well, it came in because we needed an alternative to some of the poor quality landlords of the PRS. Is it fully understood and supported? Another discussion for another time. We don't value the rental sector. That's plain and simple. We do not value it. We need to start valuing it. We need to see that it provides a range of home types to a very vast range of people. And the sales market provides a range of houses to one type of person, those who can afford a mortgage.
No, and I think that is really, really true. And I think we'll come on later in the episode a bit about kind of the political rhetoric around selling and renting. I just wanted to go back a bit to, because I absolutely agree, I think there is innovation in the rental market. But I guess one of my bugbears and something that we talk a lot on previous episodes is this segregation that we have in the rental market. And that, you know, there is a concern in PBSA around challenge cities and places, but yet we've got a housing crisis. But we can't build more PBSA because those students are living in lots of different places that isn't PBSA, but yet we're not building. So is that segregation just part of that innovation? And do you think we'll see a change where, like you say about BTR, is a mix of people living together that can live there? And is that more of what we should be doing generally as opposed to providing different segregation for different people?
Look, I think specific solutions for specific bodies of people or groups of people is always a good idea because there's a sort of a commonality amongst them. And certainly, you know, for those who make the first transition from home to university or college, wherever they're going, and, you know, you want to live amongst your peers with some level of care included so that the parents don't fret too much. So there's always a need for specific or bespoke accommodation, and I think there always will be, and that's quite a big scale of need. However, you know, nothing's a panacea for everything, and so therefore, as our needs change, as our confidence grows as individuals, why do the majority of students move out of halls after first year? Partly because they have to, partly because they want to. And they've had a year of growth, and they want to go out into to a larger world with a different type of independence. So, if the question is about student, I think that students will always gravitate to that which suits them best. And if it's the wallet, they'll make those choices. And if it's the facilities, they'll make those choices. Very often, it'll be about proximity. But we're now hearing stories of students commuting huge distances in order to get into university. Or living very far away from university campuses because it's all they can afford. So there is a question of the price point for all houses, including PBSA. But if we look at the broader issue of the diversity of homes that we have in this country, and should, you know, well, if we believe that we should only build houses and homes that are for the nuclear family, well, then we're going to exclude rather a lot of people. But that's what most planning policy supports. The nuclear family is important, but it isn't everything.
It's actually, I read a really interesting article today about why families don't live in apartments more. This was based in America, and they said it's not because families don't want to live in apartments, it's because the apartments that are being built don't suit the family. So, and that's, you know, so I think that's the same same here, probably the same everywhere. People think that families only want to live in houses, but it's not about the fact that you're on the 7th floor or you don't have a garden. It's actually the layout of the space that's been designed.
Yeah, if you look at countries that do have successful flat living, apartment living, they are designed for families. They are larger. There's space for them to breathe, if you like, and they go down and commune on the ground floor. And we've been a little bit bad at that in Britain. Our space standards are not the best in the world. They're applied too bluntly. It's a measure of quality when there can be many other measures of quality rather than just the size of your studio or your flat. But no, we will have to, if we're going to accommodate all the people in this country and also deal with it through density and not have our cities expand kind of exponentially, we will have to go vertical, and we will have to develop a culture of living in higher density buildings, and they don't all have to be, very, very tall, but, we will have to develop that culture because we won't really have much of a choice.
No, as you say, I think there's still room for innovation, and the rental market is there to deliver that. Just want to go back to a couple of things that we discussed at the BizNow conference before we finish this segment. One of them, which I just wanted to discuss because it kind of was a bit of frustration of mine when we were talking about that actually the PBSA sector needs to go back to nomination deals with universities, of actually asking them to kind of work in partnership with them, which during those COVID years when rents were high, I know that there's many PBSA operators that turned away university nominations agreements when universities were reaching out to guarantee accommodation for their students because they got a higher rent. And that to me is a real struggle when you kind of almost bite the hand that feeds you and then you want to go back and go, actually, we want to work with you. So just, interested, I guess, Sarah, on your views on that. And Brendan, interested to see whether you kind of see a world where if BTR is looking at 20% of students, whether that's a way that they'd go around kind of these nomination agreements and partnerships with universities.
It was interesting, actually, at the Urban Living Conference, they exactly suggested this. They were looking at kind of the city plans, and they noted that how many BTR buildings there were and that universities should be paying attention to that if they want to know where their students are living and keep an eye on where they are and have good partnerships with the landlords, then they shouldn't be discounting BTR. So, back to you, Brendan. Are you seeing that happening, sensing it?
We're seeing it a little bit. Investors are there to make money. Sometimes they do it sensibly and sometimes they don't. It sounds to me like if they bitten the hand that feed them, that perhaps they may have had a senior moment. I don't know. I'm not in PBSA land, and I can't comment on those dynamics. But it would seem foolhardy to not engage with the effectively your exit strategy or your source of residence and look for partnerships in that regard. One of the things that we've seen come in cycles is, this idea that it's all about the bottom line, and then we go into partnership mode, and then we come out of partnership mode and we have some other partnership version, which is a different name, but it's all about it. It seems that when we are collaborating, we are at our best. And when we don't collaborate, we are not at our best. And that's the same for the quality of the experience as much as the quality of, the overall the business model, because we live in a symbiotic system. We are not alone in our ecosystems. We have to engage and relate to other forces of supply and demand, et cetera, et cetera. So everybody makes mistakes, I guess. I don't know. What I do know is that the innovation, if we look at what investors are really looking for, they're looking for predictability, and they're looking, my phrase to describe this to everybody in built to rent land is boring is beautiful. When we get to a point where the asset, whether it be a built to rent asset or a PBSA asset or a co-living asset, is just doing its job, and it's fully let and it's collecting rents and it's getting a little bit of income from some of the other things that may be going on and so on, and it's predictable as an asset, predictable as an investment. That's when the investors really, really love it. But we also know that if you stand still, you start to rot. So you can't stand still for too long, and an innovation might have to happen. And perhaps what you described earlier, Deenie, was an innovation that perhaps didn't work. They thought there might have been. I don't know, but as long as we're not standing still, we'll probably be okay. But when we stand still, I think that's when we've got to worry.
I absolutely agree. And I think it is where a lot of the PBSA sector potentially is that it's been great for so long, that structure's worked for so long. Who's going to be the first to move and change that? And no one wants it to be them. So we'll see what happens. I guess the last thing I just want to discuss from the BizNow conference was about the Renters' Rights Bill, which was mentioned. I think my kind of view around the Renters' Rights Bill is from BPSA perspective. I don't think they're taking it seriously enough about the benefit it brings to BTR, actually. And it really isn't a leveler in many respects between PBSA and BTR. And I worry that the PBSA sector hasn't really taken that mantle on and realised that actually it's going to have potentially a negative impact on them in a world of thinking, oh, we'll just carry on as normal because we're exempt. What's your kind of take from the BTR sector around the Renters' Rights Bill?
We're a bit grumpy about it, if we're honest with ourselves. I think that it's gone a little bit too far. You know what I mean? I don't want to be political on this, but I think the version that the Conservatives worked up, I think our sector accepted that it had sufficient checks and balances, but the additional sort of rights or leaning to additional rights that go towards the resident or the tenant rather than the landlord, we think creates an imbalance that will bite us on the bum, quite frankly. So we're all waiting to see what we all kind of think we know what the final thing is going to be. But, there's a balance to be struck between attracting investment to create the homes that we need, we desperately need, and spooking investors. And when you can't have more than a guaranteed 2-month lease in effect, it's like, well, hang on a second, what's going to happen here? Now, the good news is that people don't like moving, so they'll tend not to, in my book, right? So you're not going to, and you will get some, like you get some everywhere, who will challenge any rent increase and take them to the adjudication, and it will be a mess and difficult, and everybody will be grumpy who's involved in those things. Hopefully those will be a very small proportion of it. And don't forget, in Scotland, we've had some form of rent rise control, if you like, and nobody died. Everybody managed to get on with that. But there's a number of things in the Renters' Rights Bill that I think are unintended consequences. Firstly, the exit from the broader PRS economy, not so much the build-to-rent economy, but the broader PRS. We're seeing significant numbers of mom and pop landlords who own one or half a dozen properties leaving because it's too much. They can't make it work, and the legal obligations on them are too onerous. So we're going to see a net decline in homes, available homes from the PRS rather than an increase in homes. And whilst it's designed to improve standards and bring some professionalism and all of that kind of thing, which we 100% support that, it's also going to result in the exiting of those who don't want to do that or find that too burdensome. So there will be some negative after effects of it, and I think that we need to wait and see. But on the other hand, some reform of the AST and the balance of rights between the landlord and the tenant was, I think, in my view, long overdue, and that's a good thing. Students in build-to-rent land, well, they don't have to sign a 1-year lease anymore. They can just stay for the term. But will they? Will they even be bothered to do that? But I can see that I predict there will be a move to a different demographic over time. We'll start to target the later living because you really don't have to change the building. You just have to change the marketing, and they'll be a very secure and very conservative tenancy or demographic in any building because they will want to make sure they pay their bills and, I guess, behave themselves in that sense. So I think we'll see further diversification of build-to-rent occupancy as a consequence of the Renters' Rights Bill, and we'll see some real clogging in the courts.
I think one of the challenges, I agree with everything you're saying, and the benefits for the tenant is unquestionable. But all of the regulations that could be putting HMO landlords off is going to reduce supply, definitely, not only through the Renters' Rights Bill, but through EPC, through fire regulations, through all of this. And lack of supply just means that the prices go up. So that affordability factor is something that neither PBSA at the moment nor BTR has really been able to address. And it could take that kind of lower rung, that entry level, rental model out. I'm sure that's something that we could discuss all day long. It's not for today, but it is probably, unpredicted. But
the market, landlords set rents according to what the market will bear. And this is a point that I don't think is fully understood by many. You have exploitative landlords who kick people out in order to put the rent up. So we know there's some bad ones out there. But generally speaking, in a supply and demand market, it's the market that sets the rate. It's the same for cars, it's the same for everything. And the truth of the matter is, until we build significantly more homes of all kinds, we are not going to even scratch the surface of this. And this is this can be traced back to my lifetime, certainly, where we stopped building council housing. It may not have been the most beautiful housing in the world, but it kept pace with demand. Since then, we have seen a radical and severe decline, and now we're trying to play catch up, and it's just bloody difficult.
We're going to take a quick break now. Thank you once again to BizNow for inviting us along to the Student Accommodation Summit, and we'll just hear from one of our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Utopia, the smart building platform that helps real estate owners protect the value of their assets.
From ESG compliance to energy efficiency and resident engagement, Utopia turns real-time data into action, making buildings better for people, planet and profit.
If you're in asset management or operations and care about performance, Utopia is your essential partner. Find out more at utopia.co.uk. That's utopi.co.uk.
Utopia are multi-award winning and make data acquisition, analysis and action simple for real estate investors, asset managers and operators. Do get in touch with the team there if you're looking at performance reporting, temperature control and empowering residents. We were also in London last week for the Inspiring Women in Property, and it would be remiss of me not to mention that our very own Sarah Canning was up for PBSA Woman of the Year. Sadly, she didn't win, but she's a winner in our eyes. And I think everything that she does for the sector stands for itself. But we do also applaud that Jackie Hudson from Now won this year. And Jackie's been in the sector for a very long time. So big congratulations to her. And it was great to see HR on that, winning that award, because we don't often talk about HR. And at the end of the day, people are vitally important to what PBSA operators deliver for their customers. I think, Sarah, that you put this topic on the episode agenda because you wanted me to talk about why I get slightly frustrated every year at having an Inspiring Women in Property Awards where we're sitting on our own. The women get to sit on their own and be awarded for their accolades, but the real ones are done in other means and other places. So we have the real awards and then we have the women's awards. Am I right, Sarah?
Well, yeah, to be honest, you chewed my ear off about it all night. So I thought, why not tell the rest of our audience why you don't like gender specific awards? So you have the spotlight now. Go for it.
I do. And I guess I absolutely want to celebrate women. I recognise that we probably don't have a world that we should have where there is true equality. But I do want a world where actually women can just be celebrated as part of an equal workforce in real estate. And actually, we don't need a separate awards ceremony by ourselves. We're still a long way from that. I know that. And that's why we need this. But it's not rocket science, I guess, in how we need to get there and what we need to do. And the pace is glacial as per usual. And I guess I just get frustrated every year that it is still so glacial. And that's my view. Brendan?
I think, I think there's just too many men in property, period. And I think there's too many men on building sites, period. So I agree with you in principle. And why don't we, why does it have to be gender specific? I don't know. Things are changing. They're not changing quickly enough, but at least they are moving in the right direction. And what we really need, rather than anything else, is a diversity of minds. And I think that the female brain is wired differently to the male brain, and then our individual brains are wired differently to each other. And you need that incredible matrix of possibility to really get the best results. My favorite story about this is the 9/11 attacks and the FBI or the CIA, whoever is the intelligence crowd in the US. And one of the reasons they didn't pick up on that threat and be able to foil it was because they realized that they recruited almost exclusively from the same cohort of people, which is white, middle class males who went to the same went to half a dozen universities in the States. They all came out with similar degrees, and guess what? They all thought very similarly. Because actually, what they recognized, and you've got to give them credit for admitting it, they thought if they'd had some cross-cultural diversity, some gender diversity, and some just drop a couple of crazies in there, they would have had different types of thinking, and the chances of them intercepting that terrible event would have been much, much greater. So the value of diversity is not understood, neither at a gender level nor at a kind of intellectual level. But the best results come from maximizing all the thought potential that exists out there. The trick is to draw it together and integrate it and produce something which is practical and usable and scalable and all that stuff. But we do ourselves a massive disservice if we do not take the opportunity to draw on different things. So I completely agree with you. The day that we don't have gender-specific awards will be a great day. I will say in Built to Rent land, and indeed at our conference, which is coming up on the 6th of November, quick plug there, we will have more women and diversity represented than any other ones that I've ever been to. And I think Built to Rent more generally is doing an okay job in promoting women within the industry. And I know within the ARL itself, and I have various committees and working groups and everything else, and not to be critical of any of them, but I know the ones that are either dominated or run by women are generally very successful compared to others.
I mean, I've worked in property my entire adult career. I've seen a lot of change in gender diversity, and for the better. We're still not there yet. I totally agree, but I think optically it is changing, probably depending on the event you go to. There are some that are better represented, some that aren't. I still think that the areas that the sector needs to work much harder on is age diversity and people of colour. I still think that is really, really lagging behind, that people, and it's diversity of thought, isn't it? What you just said, Brendan, that, if you don't have any diversity around a board table, or from a design perspective, or from a policy perspective, or an operations perspective, then how can you represent the people that are going to be living in your buildings, that you're going to be marketing to? And, whilst I fully appreciate we can't have, lots and lots of different events and different categories and, start, marginalising and marginalising and marginalising to give other demographics a voice, we need to find another way of doing it then, because I don't want to be an inspiring woman in PBSA. I want to be an inspiring person in PBSA, and I don't want there to be the under 30s award, or, the black people in property events, and everyone is doing their bit, but it should just be as one. So, yeah, I think gender is just one side of the story, isn't it? There's still a huge amount to do across the sector from a diversity point of view.
I mean, there are examples, maybe not always in property, but there are examples where proper equality does exist. So if you take the World Surf League, which is the professional surfing circuit around the world, you can't put a competition on unless the prize money is the same for men and women. They both get paid. They have to negotiate their own sponsorships. But in as far as that body can regulate equality, they do it absolutely, and not just through the gender, but within the diversity of drawing people in. So there are examples around the world of really, really doing it well and doing it properly. But sadly, our property chums, they're trying their best, but they may need to try harder on their school reports.
Yes, still work to do.
Well, maybe using Brendan's surf example, we need to look outside of the sector, and that is probably the same in most things, that you can't just stay within your lane, that you can learn things from other areas as well.
Oh, that's that diversity word again, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the theme for the episode. Sure.
Absolutely. We'll just take a quick break to hear from another one of our sponsors.
Wash Station proudly sponsor this episode of Housed. We provide best-in-class laundry solutions that complement your buildings. Wash Station. Smart, green, clean.
Wash Station is the pioneer of fully digital, highly sustainable and more enjoyable communal laundry rooms. Do get in touch with the team to elevate your laundry experience. And the final topic I wanted to talk about briefly today was just that we did touch on last week's episode, but both party conferences from the Conservatives and Labour talked a lot about policy and incentives for the buying process. Labour were talking about trying to make the process easier so that actually you agree up front the contract so that actually it goes smoothly through. And the Conservatives are talking about removing stamp duty. But is this at the detriment of the rental market? And should the sector be worried? And what more is being done, I guess, to raise the profile around the rental sectors of BTR, co-living, PBSA, around that it isn't always just buying is the way that you can get a home?
Yeah, I mean, I think the government, successive governments, again, going back to my point on not valuing the rental sector as an enabler to home ownership, as a facilitator of home ownership and all of that kind of thing. When is the government going to come up with a policy which helps renters rather than only helping homeowners? The rental world is not anti-home ownership. I don't know where that fallacy comes from. We are not at all. We recognize what we do is acting as a facilitator or a stopgap until you go and buy your own place or whatever the case may be. Indeed, there's strong evidence that if you have a development and you have rental in rental properties, a good proportion of them within, and particularly built to rent, that it actually speeds up the sales of houses and it shortens the construction process, which is good for the bank balance and helps to deliver more and more homes and gets communities established. So the government is myopic in its approach. So I mean, removing stamp duty is a silver bullet approach, but the only people who really benefit from that are the people who have big properties to sell. Much better would be a discount on deposits, or some other form to enable home ownership. You know, the right to buy thing it appeared on the surface to do a good job and many benefited from it, but it didn't really increase the volume of housing, not really. So, you know, I think we need to stop tinkering and looking at silver bullet headlines and say, what is really going to work here? You know, making it easier to sell and buy a house, of course that's a good thing. Of course it is, because it's the most arcane system I've ever encountered, the one that we use here in the UK. I just makes no sense to me at all. So we can bring greater efficiency to those things, and we'll all save some money and save some time, and that's great. But how are we actually enabling people to buy their properties? And more to the point, how are we enabling the rental sector to provide that stopgap? We're not. I mean, there was a press release on a government planning bill coming through, and they released some of the details. It's tinkering at the edges. We need to bite the bullet. You know, in my view, we should have a presumption in favor of development if it's housing. You still got to go through your DDs and the planning stuff. You got to make sure that, you know, you meet standard. But if there's a balance of compliance and it's housing, there should be a presumption in favor, because we have to deliver such a volume that unless we make some radical shifts in our thinking and in our approach, we are never going to get there. And I mean, I did some research, like, you know, baby boomers, and I'm not one of them, 80% of them are homeowners. Gen X, I'm a Gen Xer, 70%. Go down to millennials, only 50% of them will ever own a home. 50% of millennials. Then we go to Gen Z, prediction, 29% will ever own a home. Gen Alpha, there's no stats on that, but it just says it's a very high likelihood of never owning a home. And Gen Beta, when they come along, even worse so. So if they're not going to own a home, where are they going to live?
But also, why is that seen as a negative? That's the rhetoric that I really don't like, that, oh, poor Gen Alpha, you're never going to own a home. Like, I just want to flip the whole narrative about the positivity of renting, and that renting shouldn't be a plan B. It shouldn't be, oh, I feel so sorry for you because you're never going to buy a home. I don't know. I don't like it. I have children. They are either Gen Z or Gen Alpha. They're between those ages. And, you know, we've certainly never drummed it down their throat that they are a failure unless they strive to buy a home, you know, and that's hard when the government are they are tinkering around the edges, but they're pretty big policy moves that they're putting forward to try and encourage more people to buy. I mean, I said it in COVID, people were being offered mortgage breaks over COVID. Why weren't they being offered rental breaks? Because it's the same thing. And for a lot of people, their rent is higher than their mortgage.
But there's a deeper issue here, and the deeper issue of democracy. Because renters are looked at as second-class citizens and somehow lesser citizens, renters do not have the same democratic stability as those who are homeowners. They are subject to more onerous checks and balances. They are not given the freedoms in their homes to do a lot of what they should be able to do. They are not able to use their homes in the way that a homeowner is able to use them. Now, there are aspects of this which are undemocratic, and we live in a democracy, one of the oldest democracies. So there's a point when all of these renters are finally going to be realized as voters. And oh my God, we better look after these people. Now, Build to Rent came in to provide an alternative to some of the negativity that was around the PRS. And that's not to say there aren't any good people in the PRS. There's many, many good landlords, but unfortunately, there's a perception that everybody is bad and it does a bad job. And that's not true. But Build to Rent recognized that there was an opportunity to produce something different, yet another innovation from renting, and provide an alternative which is institutionally backed and should be able to deliver at scale. So our sense is that we could deliver 2 million homes. 2 million homes is the capacity within Build to Rent, and attract over £300 billion of investment into the UK. But to get that, you've got to pull the Build to Rent lever. You've got to make it easier for Build to Rent to get off the ground. I think the government needs to really think hard. We look discounting 106 agreements to get a volume established, promote renting as a positive thing, to get rid of this cultural illegitimacy and this democratic inequality as well. So, yeah, in a world where diversity is really, really important, renters are part of that diversity too, and we need to recognize the value that they bring to society.
I was just thinking that with the rise of BTR, and I don't think that the public really understand what it is, but moving forward, hopefully, with some good marketing efforts, that will be the case. The rhetoric that I hear is, I don't want to rent because I don't want to pay somebody else's mortgage. And I guess because people can see their landlord, it's a physical person. I wonder if with the move towards BTR, that paying somebody else's mortgage might not be a thing. Maybe that will change because that landlord's not visible. Nobody's going to be necessarily thinking about paying an operator's mortgage. It doesn't really work that way, but they've got to understand the professionalism and the management side of what BTR offers. And controversially or not, I still think that BTR marketers are still focusing too much on amenity-led communications rather than the security of tenure, rather than the professionalization of the management. That, for me, is the winner. And until people really start communicating that, I'm not sure we're going to move away from that I don't want to pay somebody else's mortgage side of things.
I completely agree. And I mean, on the mortgage, on all your points, on the mortgage side, you're really contributing to your own pension, because the people who are developing Build to Rent are the big pension funds. So it's not that you're not just throwing your money away. You're in some way shoring up your own pension if you're with those organizations. So, it's not, it does have a direct and indirect benefit to society in that sort of short and long term in terms of that money. But of course, the value is not going to probably be as great as if you had a property value increase over 20 years or whatever the case may be. But I do think the communication of Build to Rent is poor. We're working hard on that. We formed the Build to Rent Alliance, which is a collaboration between us and the BPF and industry leaders, chaired by Clive Betts, who chaired the cross-party housing committee for many years. So he's a great person and very knowledgeable. We have developed our code of practice, which we have used the PBSA code of practice as a benchmark. In fact, I've used the same guys who wrote that to help us get ours. This is now currently with the Ombudsman. We're going to get his feedback on it. And that's our social contract. Call it whatever you want, but at the end of the day, we want to say to society and to government, judge us by these standards. And it's about building trust. If we strip it all away, all of these things are about building trust and building the ability to say, I can have a good life here, and I know that this landlord is going to support me in having a good life here. And that talks to the security of tenure, it talks to the quality of accommodation, it talks to the promotion of community within those spaces. And I think the sector not only needs to explain the value of renting, the value of build to rent, and explain actually what it is. It also needs to say we are not scared to put our money where our mouth is and sign up to a charter that we hope in time the government will recognise as being good and proper and to the benefit of both the investment and the operating world as well as the consumer. And when we get there, and hopefully that's not too far away now, we can say that we have played a good game, that we have said we have laid our cards on the table and we want to be judged by that. And I think that hopefully that will also add to an understanding of the value of the build-to-rent sector specifically, of course, but just that there are good people in renting, and you are not inadequate because you rent.
Absolutely. And I think we could probably go for longer on this topic, but I'm conscious of the time. But it's a fascinating topic, and I think there is more work to do in educating people about the rental opportunities out there. Before we close out, we did make a big announcement this week on LinkedIn about UK REEF. We have been attending over the past couple of years, and we have noted the lack of content involving PBSA, co-living, BTR, and university accommodation. And after speaking with you all, it would seem that I think everyone does agree. So with the support of the UK REEF organisers, thank you very much, the House team are going to be creating Housed, the Shared Living Summit at the 2026 UK REEF in Leeds from the 19th to the 21st of May. It's going to be a great event. You can expect all the good things that you get from Housed every week. We will be doing live podcasts, amazing panel discussions, speaking about challenging topics, live youth forums, and great networking opportunities, and very much more. But ultimately, we can't do it alone, and we wouldn't want to. We're part of the sector, and we want to take the sector with us. So you asked for this, so now we're inviting you all to partner with us to make this an event to remember. We're working at the moment behind the scenes on a media pack and what that will look like. But if you do want to be the first to hear about partnership opportunities, please do get in touch. You're not committing to anything. If you do get in touch, you're just letting us know that you might be interested. And if you do, we'll ensure you're on the priority list for more details. And we're just really excited to be taking Housed on tour and you all with us. Sarah, as part of that, I know you went to a dinner last week. I don't know if you quickly want to just update us on kind of what that was about and what happened.
Yeah, I didn't know what to expect when I was invited to a UK REEF dinner. It was all about the New Towns plan for the UK. It was really collaborative, informative and welcoming. And it just made me think, actually, that's what UK REEF is about. It pulls you out of your silo, leverages your experience and your knowledge by being immersed really in the whole real estate sector. I think all too often, we go to our PBSA events, our BTR events, our co-living events, but UK REEF is something that builds on so much more than that. You can buy early release tickets at 2026.ukreef.com/registration if you haven't already. Although by partnering with us, many of our packages will have tickets included as well. So we look forward to talking about our plans for it and getting everyone's feedback and buy-in over the next few months on that as well.
That's great. So as we close out, a big thank you to you, Brendan. It's been a fascinating conversation. So thank you very much for joining us. And I know Dan is very pleased that he was able to take a week off for his maternity leave. So thank you. Thank you to my student halls for being our headline sponsor for the season. Your support is always hugely appreciated. And of course, thank you also to Utopia and Wash Station for joining us again for season 5. We're also grateful for your support. We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed recording it. I think it's been fascinating to have Brendan here, so a big thank you again. If you've got any hot topics or ideas of what you want to cover off in season 5 from PBSA, BTR, co-living, later living, HMOs or university accommodation, please do get in touch with us at hello@housepodcast.com, and we will see you all next week.